Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way. 3 True Christmas Horror Stories. Story 1. The Christmas Eve Visitor. You know that feeling you get on Christmas Eve? That mix of excitement and exhaustion? Yeah, well, imagine that feeling, twisted into something terrifying. This happened to a guy named Marcus in 2015. He was living alone in a small house outside of Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place where he could spend the holidays in peace. His family lived out of state, and honestly, Marcus didn't mind spending Christmas by himself. He had his traditions: hot cocoa, classic horror movies, a nice dinner for one. Simple stuff. The day before Christmas, around 2 p.m., Marcus decided to go out and grab some last-minute groceries. Nothing unusual. He needed eggnog, some good cheese, maybe some wine. He locked up his house like always, checked that all the doors were secure, and drove to the store. He was only gone for about an hour. When he got back and pulled into his driveway, something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it at first. Everything looked normal. The lights were off inside, which made sense since he'd left them off. But there was this presence, I guess you could call it. That sixth sense that tells you something isn't right. Marcus got out of his car slowly. He grabbed his groceries from the trunk and walked up to his front door. That's when he noticed it. The door was open, just a crack, maybe an inch or two. His heart started racing. He knew, absolutely knew, that he'd locked that door. He always locked it. It was a habit so ingrained that he checked multiple times if he had to go anywhere. But there it was, hanging slightly open, waiting. Now, Marcus wasn't stupid. He didn't immediately rush inside. Instead, he set his groceries down on the porch and called 911. The dispatcher told him to wait outside and not to approach the house. Within about 10 minutes, 2 police officers showed up. They went through the entire house, checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. Nobody. The officers couldn't find any signs of forced entry. The back door was locked. The windows were all secure. It was like the door had just opened itself somehow. The cops asked Marcus if maybe he'd forgotten to lock it, if maybe the latch hadn't caught properly. Marcus insisted that he'd locked it. He was sure of it. The officers left, not entirely convinced, but they filed a report anyway. They told Marcus to call back if anything else seemed off. That night, Marcus was understandably on edge. He locked every door. He locked them twice. He checked them 3 times. He left every light in the house on and sat on his couch with a baseball bat nearby, which, honestly, probably wouldn't have done much good, but it made him feel better. He didn't sleep that night. He just sat there waiting, listening to the sounds of his house settle and creak around him. Christmas morning came, and nothing had happened. Marcus felt a little foolish. Maybe the door hadn't been fully closed. Maybe the wind had blown it open. Maybe he was just paranoid. He decided to try and salvage the day. He made himself a nice breakfast, opened a bottle of wine even though it was only 11 a.m., and tried to relax. Around 3 p.m. on Christmas Day, Marcus got a call from his mother. She was checking in, making sure he was doing okay spending the holiday alone. They talked for about 20 minutes. He didn't mention the door incident. No point in worrying her over what was probably nothing. After they hung up, Marcus felt the familiar Christmas Eve feeling return. that mix of comfort and melancholy that comes from the quiet aftermath of the holiday. He decided to take a nap. He was exhausted from staying awake all night. He went upstairs to his bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on his bed. He fell asleep almost immediately. He woke up about 2 hours later to a sound, a door closing. Downstairs. Marcus's eyes snapped open. His body went completely rigid. He listened intently, barely breathing, and then he heard it again. Definitely a door. Downstairs. The sound of it clicking shut. Someone was in his house. Marcus's mind raced. He'd locked every door. He'd checked them, but someone was downstairs. His hands were shaking as he quietly got out of bed. He could hear footsteps now. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through his downstairs. They weren't trying to be quiet. Whoever it was, they were just walking around, like they owned the place. Marcus grabbed his phone and called 911 again. The dispatcher told him to lock himself in a room and wait for the police. He went into his bathroom, locked the door, and sat in the bathtub. He could hear the footsteps getting closer. Up the stairs, down the hallway, past his bedroom. The footsteps. They stopped right outside his bathroom door. Marcus held his breath. His phone was in his hand, the line to 911 still open. The dispatcher was whispering to him, asking if he could still hear the footsteps telling him help was on the way. The bathroom doorknob jiggled, just once, like someone was testing it, like someone was checking if it was locked. Then, nothing. The footsteps retreated back down the hallway. Marcus could hear them going back downstairs, moving through his house again. Within about 5 minutes, he heard sirens approaching. The footsteps stopped abruptly. There was a moment of complete silence, and then he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of the front door opening. By the time the police officers got inside, whoever had been in the house was gone. But here's the thing, and this is what Marcus couldn't explain. The back door was wide open. The same back door that had been locked when he'd checked it earlier. It was open just enough for someone to slip through. The police searched the area around his house with flashlights and dogs. Nothing. No sign of forced entry on the back door. No broken locks. It was like someone had simply unlocked it from the inside and left. The officers took another report. They increased patrols in the neighborhood. They asked Marcus again if he was absolutely certain he'd locked all his doors. He was certain. He was always certain. But here's what Marcus couldn't shake. Couldn't get out of his head even weeks later. When the police were searching his house, they found something in his bedroom. On his nightstand, right next to where his head had been resting while he slept, was a muddy footprint. A wet footprint like someone had been standing there watching him sleep, watching him while he was completely defenseless. The police collected it as evidence, but they never found out who it was. Marcus moved out 3 weeks later. He never spent another Christmas in that house. And here's the really unsettling part, the part that keeps people awake at night. Marcus never found out what the intruder wanted. Were they planning to rob him? Were they planning something worse? And most importantly, how long had they been inside the house before he woke up? How long had they been standing there watching him sleep in the darkness? Story 2. The Christmas Radio Knew. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to a woman named Sarah. This was back in 1998, which doesn't sound that long ago. But it was before everyone had cell phones and the internet. It was simpler times, more isolated times. Sarah was a radio host. She worked the midnight to 6 a.m. shift at a small station called Cracks FM in rural Montana. Most people would hate that shift, but Sarah loved it. She loved the quiet hours. She loved talking to the few people who called in during those late-night slots. Insomniacs, truckers, people going through rough times. The night shift on a radio station has this weird intimacy to it, you know? You're talking to strangers in the darkness, and somehow it feels like the most honest conversations happen at 3 in the morning. 1 week before Christmas, 1998, something strange started happening. During her midnight shift, Sarah would get a call, always the same time, around 2:47 a.m., almost to the minute. The caller never said anything. He would just breathe on the line. Not heavy breathing, not aggressive or anything like that, just breathing like someone was there, like someone was listening. Sarah would try to engage with him. She'd say hello. She'd ask his name. She'd tell him if he wanted to talk, she was there to listen. Nothing, just breathing. And then, after about 30 seconds, the line would go dead. The first night it happened, Sarah didn't think much of it. Prank calls happen. They happen all the time at radio stations, especially late at night. But the second night, when it happened at exactly 2:47 a.m. again, Sarah started to wonder. Third night, same thing. Fourth night. Fifth night. By the end of the week, Sarah was expecting it. At 2:47 a.m., like clockwork, the phone would ring. Sarah's producer, a guy named David who worked in the booth next to hers, started noticing it too. He'd see Sarah's shoulders tense up as the clock approached 2:47. He'd watch her face change as the call came through. David eventually asked her what was going on, and Sarah told him about the phantom caller. David's reaction was to brush it off. He said it was probably just some guy trying to get a rise out of her, that she shouldn't let it bother her. But it was bothering her. It was bothering her a lot. The calls continued for 2 more weeks. Every single night at 2:47 a.m., just breathing. Just presence, just something on the other end of the line that Sarah couldn't identify or understand. Then, on December 23rd, something changed. That night at 2:47 a.m., the phone rang like always. Sarah took the call. She expected the usual breathing, the usual silence. But this time the caller spoke. It was a woman's voice, distorted like it was being run through a synthesizer or something. The voice was saying something over and over, but Sarah couldn't quite make out the words. It sounded like it was saying, don't go home. Don't go home. Sarah's hand was shaking. She asked who this was, what they meant. The voice kept repeating the same thing, getting slightly faster, slightly more urgent. Don't go home. Don't go home. Don't go home. And then it stopped. The line went dead. Sarah sat there, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. She was visibly shaken. David noticed immediately from the booth next to her. He came over and asked what was wrong. Sarah told him what the caller had said. David told her she was letting this get to her too much, that she needed to relax, that it was probably just someone messing with her head. But Sarah couldn't shake it. The voice had sounded so urgent, so desperate. Don't go home. The rest of her shift was rough. She was distracted, fumbling over her words, forgetting what she was supposed to say. At 6 a.m., when her shift ended, Sarah didn't go home right away. She told David what was bothering her, and David, probably out of concern or maybe just to prove to her that nothing was wrong, offered to follow her home in his car, just to make sure everything was okay. They drove to Sarah's apartment. It was a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet part of town. Everything looked normal. The lights were off. Nothing seemed disturbed. David parked outside and waited while Sarah went in. Sarah unlocked the front door and stepped inside. She flicked on the light in the entryway. Everything looked fine. She called out just to be safe, even though she lived alone. No one answered. Of course, no one answered. She checked the entire apartment. Every room, every closet, nothing, no signs of an intruder. No indication that anyone had been inside. Sarah checked her windows. They were all locked. She checked her back door. Locked. Everything was secure. She came back outside and told David that everything was fine. David looked relieved, and honestly, Sarah was starting to feel a little silly. Here she was, letting a prank caller get into her head so much that she'd convinced David to follow her home. Embarrassing. David headed home to get some sleep, and Sarah went back inside. She tried to sleep, but she couldn't. She kept thinking about that voice, that synthesized, desperate voice saying, "Don't go home." Well, she'd gone home, and nothing had happened. Maybe David was right. Maybe she was letting this get to her. Maybe it was all just a sick prank. Sarah eventually drifted off to sleep around 9 a.m. She slept until about 3 p.m. when she woke up to her phone ringing. It was David. He sounded panicked. He was asking her if she was okay, if anything had happened to her last night. Sarah said no, everything was fine. Why was he asking? David told her that he'd woken up to find his apartment ransacked. His TV was smashed. His drawers were pulled open. But nothing was stolen. Nothing was taken. It was just destroyed. Like someone had been looking for something, or like someone had been making a point. And here's what made Sarah's blood run cold. David lived 3 blocks away from her. 3 blocks in the opposite direction. Sarah told David to call the police. He already had. The cops came and took a report, but again there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. It was like someone had just gotten in and trashed the place for no reason. Over the next few days, Sarah started hearing things. Neighbors on her street had been broken into. Not robbed, broken into, vandalized, destroyed from the inside, but nothing taken. 6 apartments in a 2-block radius, all within the same 24-hour period. All with no sign of forced entry. And then the calls stopped. The phantom caller never called again. 2:07 a.m. came and went without a ring. Silence on the other end of the line. Silence everywhere. Sarah quit her job at KRX-FM a week later. She couldn't handle the shifts anymore. Couldn't handle the dead air, the strange calls, the feeling that something was watching her from the darkness. But here's what haunts her even now. All these years later, she never found out who the caller was. Never found out what they wanted. Never found out why they'd warned her not to go home. Why they'd told David's apartment and 5 others to be destroyed the same night. And the really unsettling part? A few months after everything happened, Sarah ran into an old friend at a coffee shop. They got to talking, and somehow the conversation turned to that December. Her friend casually mentioned that she'd heard something on the news about a string of break-ins in that area. The cops had eventually caught someone, a guy who'd been breaking into apartments and destroying them systematically. He'd said when they caught him that he was looking for someone. He wouldn't say who. He wouldn't say why. He just kept repeating that he was looking for the voice on the radio, and when Sarah heard that, when she realized that maybe that caller had been warning her for a reason, that maybe the voice on the radio was important to someone dangerous, she never went back to radio after that. Story 3. The Christmas Present. This last story is about a family. A normal family, just like yours probably. And it's about what happened to them one Christmas. The Henderson family, that's mom, dad, their 2 kids, Emma and Tyler, who were 8 and 10 respectively, lived in a suburban neighborhood just outside Denver, Colorado. By all accounts, they were happy. Dad had a good job in IT. Mom was an accountant. The kids did well in school. They took a family vacation every summer. They were the kind of family that had it all figured out, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. Christmas morning, 2003. The whole family woke up early, excited to see what Santa had brought. They came downstairs together, turned on the tree lights, and saw the gifts arranged underneath. It was a typical Christmas morning, wrapping paper being torn open, kids laughing, parents sipping coffee and watching their children experience that pure, unbridled joy. But there was one gift that had appeared overnight that nobody remembered seeing before. It was under the tree, wrapped in red paper with a gold bow. There was no tag on it, no name. Just the package, perfect and pristine, waiting to be opened. Mom asked Dad if he'd wrapped that. Dad said no. Dad asked Mom if she'd wrapped that. Mom said no. They both looked at Emma and Tyler, who were already reaching for it, curious about this mysterious gift that nobody seemed to have put there. "Stop," Dad said. There was something in his tone that made the kids freeze. "Don't touch that." The parents looked at each other. There was this weird moment where they were communicating without words, kind of the way long married couples do. Some of you probably know that feeling, that telepathic understanding. Dad went to the front door. He checked the lock. It was secure. Mom checked the back door. It was locked too. All the windows were closed and locked. Nothing had been tampered with. But someone had put a gift under their Christmas tree while they were all asleep upstairs. Dad was the first to think they should open it. He figured it was probably just a neighbor kid playing a prank, or maybe someone from the extended family had dropped by and left it as a surprise. But Mom was nervous. She didn't want the kids near it. She wanted to call the police. They stood in the living room staring at this wrapped box, and they felt this creeping sense of dread, this uninvited presence in their home, this thing that had been placed there by someone they didn't know. Dad eventually made the decision. He was going to open it, carefully, in the garage, away from the kids. He carried the box into the garage, set it on the workbench, and very carefully began to unwrap it. The red paper came off to reveal a plain cardboard box. Inside the cardboard box was another box, and inside that box was another box, like Russian nesting dolls but cardboard, box after box after box. When Dad got to the final box, the smallest one, it was about the size of a shoebox. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was a photo of their house, but not from outside, from inside. It was taken from the hallway upstairs, and it was aimed at a bedroom door. A child's bedroom door. The photo was time-stamped, December 22nd, 11:47 p.m., the night before. Dad's hands started shaking. He brought the photo back inside and showed it to Mom. Mom's face went pale. She called 911 immediately. The police came within 15 minutes. They searched the entire house. They checked for signs of forced entry, for windows that had been pried open, for anything that would indicate how someone had gotten inside. But just like in the other stories I've told you, there was nothing. No evidence. No signs of intrusion. No explanation for how someone had been able to get inside their home, climb their stairs, take a photograph in their child's bedroom while they slept, and leave without leaving a single trace. The police took the photo as evidence. They filed a report. They told the Henderson family to install a better security system, maybe motion sensor lights outside, maybe cameras, maybe to increase their awareness. But they had no real leads, no real answers. That Christmas was ruined. The kids didn't understand why the house felt different now, why the place that was supposed to be safe suddenly wasn't. The parents barely slept that night, every sound sending them rushing to check on their children. Over the next few weeks, the family tried to get back to normal. They installed a sophisticated security system. They got a dog. They changed their routines. Anything to feel safe again. About 2 weeks later, on January 8th, Emma came downstairs crying. She'd had a nightmare. She told Mom that she'd dreamed about the person in the hallway photograph. She'd dreamed about looking out her window and seeing a figure standing in the backyard, just watching the house, just standing there in the dark watching. Mom comforted her. Kids have nightmares. That's normal, right? Totally normal. Except when Emma described the figure, she described it with impossible detail. The clothing. The way it stood. Even minor things like the way one of its arms hung differently than the other. It was too specific for a dream. It was too real. That morning, Mom went outside to check the backyard. She was looking for footprints, any sign that someone had actually been there. And she found one. A single footprint in the soft dirt near the flower bed. A large footprint. A man's footprint. The police came back. They took casts of the footprint and sent them to the lab. They increased patrols in the neighborhood. They put up wanted posters for suspicious individuals seen lurking in the area. But nothing came of it. The Henderson family stayed in that house for another 8 months. 8 months of heightened anxiety. 8 months of checking locks obsessively. 8 months of knowing that someone had been inside their home while they slept. Someone had been close enough to Emma while she was sleeping to take a photograph of her bedroom door. In August 2004, they sold the house for significantly less than it was worth. They needed out. They couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. And here's the thing that keeps people awake at night about this story. The case was never solved. Nobody was ever caught. Nobody was ever identified. The police never discovered who had been inside that house that Christmas Eve, or why they'd left that gift, or what their intentions had been. That photograph was the only piece of evidence. And it only raised questions: who was in their house? How did they get in? Why did they take a photo of Emma's bedroom? What would have happened if the family had gone back to sleep that Christmas morning instead of waking up? What if they'd simply gone outside to get the paper and never checked under the tree until later that day? Those are the questions that haunt the Henderson family to this day. Those are the questions that, I suspect, will haunt you as well once you turn off this video and settle into bed tonight. Because here's what really gets to me about these stories, and why they stick with you. In each one, someone or something knew where these people lived, knew how to get inside without leaving a trace, knew their routines, knew their vulnerabilities, and in each case, they made contact. They left a calling card. They left a message: don't go home. A footprint on a nightstand, a photograph from inside a child's room. These aren't random acts. These are intentional. These are messages from someone who had access to you while you were completely vulnerable. Someone who could have done anything, but didn't, at least. Not yet. That's what I think about when I'm lying in bed at night. And I suspect that's what you'll be thinking about too.